Global Times, 4th of December 2022. Albanese is blamed for being dishonest about repairing relations with bullying Beijing despite his efforts to disassociate himself from a delegation travelling from Taiwan. Australian exports have been subject to sanctions from Beijing for the past 3 years, allowing Australia to diversify and move away from belligerent countries, China. Instead of taking a principled stand against a bipartisan delegation of Australian politicians visiting Taiwan, Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has sought to distance himself from the board by stating that the board is not on official business and that he has no idea of the purpose of the trip. He was playing the doublespeak game in Chinese. There is a big question mark over Australia's sincerity regarding improving its relations with China, Chinese observers said after China's devastating sanctions on Australia over the last 3 years. Albanese's vague and cop-out remarks will undoubtedly encourage the arrogance of anti-China and pro-Taiwan secessionist forces in Australia. According to Australian media, 6 federal MPs from the coalition and Labor landed in Taiwan Island on Sunday, marking the first visit by Australian MPs since 2019. According to an Australian news site, the Sydney Morning Herald, the group includes former Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce, Labor lawmakers Meryl Swanson and Libby Coker, members of the Liberal National Party Scott Buchholz and Terry Young, and Liberal Gavin Pearce. Albanese responded by asserting, "It isn't a government visit, there remains a non-partisan perspective when it comes to supporting the status quo on Taiwan area," during a press conference on Saturday morning. When questioned about the Australian M.P. strip, Albanese responded, "I am clueless. I won't be going. Inquire with them. As opposed to China, a communist nation, Australia is a democracy with members of the government having freedom of expression." According to the so-called tripartite system in the West, the Prime Minister or President may not be able to block legislative actions directly. However, Chen Hong, President of the Chinese Association of Australian Studies and Director of the Australian Studies Centre at East China Normal University, told the Global Times on Sunday that the head of state, in this case, can express his opposition to the visit, calling it an inappropriate behaviour. However, Albanese appears to be playing down the visit out of political correctness due to worries that Beijing will take offence at the trip's challenge to the One China principle after relations between the two countries started to improve after China began to back down recently, Chinese Chen pointed out. The most recent trip, while not sponsored by the Australian government, is unquestionably not a people-to-people visit because it would include meetings with Tsai Ing-wen, the regional leader of Taiwan, and Joseph Wu, the island's top official for foreign affairs, Chen noted. According to Chen, the trip mimics pro-Taiwan separatist groups in Australia and worldwide and aims to undermine the false One China premise. The trip reveals that anti-China groups within the Australian government are attempting to block the development of Beijing-Canberra relations at a time when those relations are heading toward détente. At the G20 summit in Bali, Indonesia, on November 15, Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and Chinese President Xi Jinping had official and conciliatory conversations. These were the two leaders' first meetings since Malcolm Turnbull took office as the Australian leader in 2016. The high-level meeting can be seen as a top-down shift and a significant turning point in their relationship. Still, despite Canberra's provocative actions in support of the US-led Indo-Pacific strategy, which observers believe enables it to resist Chinese bullying, there is little room for improvement. There is a significant question mark about Australia's desire and sincerity in repairing relations with China, Chen said, even though the trip is not anticipated to be compared to U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's confrontational travel to the island of Taiwan in August. China declares, Chen cautioned that Canberra would bear the consequences if Australia's reckless actions harm the hard-won improvement of relations between China and Australia. Australia will once more face trade sanctions from China. Pelosi's provocative trip to Taiwan started a risky pattern in which lawmakers from several Western nations visited the island repeatedly while being influenced by groups opposed to China and nations standing up for democracies. For instance, despite China's adamant resistance, a team from the UK's House of Commons visited the island in late November. The Chinese embassy in the UK responded by denouncing the trip as a flagrant violation of the One China principle and a severe intervention in China's domestic affairs, and it sent a seriously erroneous signal to the freedom-loving forces for Taiwan independence, among other things. On November 30,